The bride caught her billionaire groom with another woman on their wedding night. What she did next made him regret ever underestimating her. Her pearl necklace caught the moonlight as she pressed her ear against the penthouse door, listening to her billionaire husband promise another woman that their marriage was just a business transaction, that she was nothing more than breeding stock for his empire. But Jonathan Thornfield had no idea who he'd really married. The poor girl from Brooklyn wasn't just going to cry and file for divorce. She was going to destroy everything he'd built, piece by piece, using the very weapons he'd taught her. And it would start with the recording she was making right now, capturing every brutal word about how grateful and controllable she was supposed to be. What she did next would make headlines for years and turn a wedding night betrayal into the most expensive mistake a billionaire ever made. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like this video and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now let's get into the story. The champagne bubbles danced in crystal flutes like tiny diamonds, each one catching the warm glow of the chandeliers that hung like frozen fireworks above the grand ballroom of the Belmont estate. 200 of Manhattan's elite swayed to the gentle melody of a 12-piece orchestra, their designer gowns and tailored tuxedos creating a sea of elegance that would grace the society pages for weeks to come. Amara Sinclair, now Amara Thornfield, stood at the edge of the marble dance floor, her fingers unconsciously smoothing the intricate beadwork of her custom Vera Wang gown. The dress hugged her curves like liquid silk, its sweetheart neckline adorned with hand-sewn pearls that had belonged to her grandmother. Every detail had been meticulously planned, from the white roses imported from Ecuador to the 7-tier cake that towered like a sugary monument to their union. Mrs. Thornfield. The name still felt foreign on her tongue as she practiced it silently, watching her new husband work the room with the practiced ease of a man born into privilege. Jonathan Thornfield III commanded attention without effort. His 6'2" frame cut an imposing figure in his bespoke Armani tuxedo, his sandy brown hair perfectly styled, and those piercing blue eyes that had first captivated her at a charity gala 18 months ago. He was everything she had never dared to dream of: successful, powerful, devastatingly handsome, and worth more than most small countries' GDP. The Thornfield empire spanned real estate, technology, and media, built over 3 generations into a dynasty that shaped markets with a single decision. Jonathan was its golden heir, groomed from birth to inherit not just wealth, but influence that reached into every corner of American society. Amara had grown up in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, where her mother worked double shifts as a nurse to keep them afloat after her father walked out when she was 7. She remembered countless nights falling asleep to the sound of her mother's tired footsteps, the rustle of scrubs being hung up after another 16-hour day. Education had been her ladder out: scholarships to Columbia for her MBA, followed by a meteoric rise through the ranks of strategic consulting that had eventually led her to the charity circuit where Manhattan's elite gathered to see and be seen. She wasn't naive about the whispers that followed their courtship. Gold digger. Social climber. What does he see in her? The comments stung because part of her wondered the same thing. What had made Jonathan Thornfield, who could have any woman in New York, choose her? He'd pursued her relentlessly after that first meeting, sending flowers to her modest apartment, taking her to restaurants she'd only read about in magazines, introducing her to a world of private jets and weekend estates in the Hamptons. "Darling, you look like you're a million miles away." The voice belonged to Vivian Thornfield, Jonathan's mother, who glided up beside her with the predatory grace of a woman who had spent 40 years navigating high society. Her silver hair was swept into an elegant chignon, and her navy blue Oscar de la Renta gown probably cost more than Amara used to make in 6 months. "Just taking it all in," Amara replied, forcing a smile. "It's been quite a day." Vivian's eyes, the same piercing blue as her son's, swept over the reception with calculated approval. "Indeed. Though I must say, the flowers could have used a bit more height. I did mention to the wedding planner that we needed more dramatic arrangements for a venue of this scale." The criticism was subtle but unmistakable, another reminder that despite the ring on her finger and the Thornfield name she now carried, Amara would always be under scrutiny. She bit back the response that rose to her lips, instead taking a sip of champagne that had long since lost its effervescence. "Mrs. Thornfield, congratulations." A photographer from Vanity Fair approached with a practiced smile. "Could we get a few shots of the bride?" Maybe by the cake table. Amara nodded, grateful for the escape from Vivian's piercing gaze. As she posed for what felt like the 100th photo of the day, she caught glimpses of Jonathan across the room. He was deep in conversation with Senator Morrison, their heads bent together in the kind of intimate discussion that suggested business rather than celebration. Even on his wedding day, Jonathan was networking, building the connections that would expand the Thornfield influence. It was one of the things that had both attracted and unsettled her about him during their courtship. His mind was always working, always calculating the next move. She'd learned to recognize the slight tightening around his eyes when he was strategizing, the way his smile could be turned on and off like a switch depending on his audience. "Beautiful ceremony," commented Mrs. Astor, the widow of a shipping magnate, as she air-kissed Amara's cheeks. "Though I was surprised by the jazz quartet during the processional. Quite modern." Another backhanded compliment. Amara had specifically chosen the jazz arrangement because it reminded her of her grandmother, who used to hum Billie Holiday songs while braiding her hair on Sunday mornings. She'd wanted something personal in a ceremony that had largely been orchestrated by wedding planners and society expectations. The evening wore on in a blur of congratulations, carefully choreographed photos, and conversations that felt more like diplomatic negotiations than celebrations. Amara found herself watching Jonathan from across the room, studying this man she had promised to love and honor until death do them part. He was charming the wives of his business associates, regaling them with stories that had them throwing back their heads in perfectly timed laughter. She noticed how he touched the small of women's backs just a beat too long when guiding them to their tables, how his eyes lingered on the curves of the younger women in ways that made her stomach tighten with an emotion she didn't want to name. These were probably innocent gestures. Jonathan was naturally charismatic after all. That's what had drawn her to him in the first place. What do you think drives someone to seek validation through wealth and status, even on their wedding day? Share your thoughts below. As the orchestra struck up their first dance song, Etta James at last, Jonathan appeared at her side, extending his hand with the kind of smile that had graced magazine covers. "Mrs. Thornfield, may I have this dance?" The spotlight found them as they moved to the center of the dance floor, and Amara felt the weight of 200 pairs of eyes watching their every move. Jonathan's hand was warm against her waist as he pulled her close, his cologne, something expensive and understated, surrounding her like a cloud. "You look breathtaking," he murmured against her ear, his voice carrying just the right amount of husky intimacy for the cameras. "The most beautiful bride Manhattan has ever seen." She should have felt cherished, adored, swept away by the romance of the moment. Instead, she found herself wondering if he meant it or if it was simply another performance in the theater of their very public life. The thought made her feel guilty. This was her wedding day, she should be blissfully happy, not analyzing her husband's sincerity. "Thank you," she whispered back, allowing him to spin her in a move they'd practiced with the dance instructor 3 times a week for the past month. Everything had to be perfect, choreographed, ready for the society photographers who would immortalize this moment in glossy magazines. As they swayed together, Amara caught sight of a woman standing near the champagne fountain. She was stunning in that effortless way that spoke of good breeding and expensive grooming. Platinum blonde hair that caught the light like spun gold, wearing a scarlet red dress that hugged her model-thin figure perfectly. But it wasn't her beauty that made Amara's breath catch. It was the way the woman was watching Jonathan with an intensity that felt almost proprietary. "Who is that?" Amara asked, trying to keep her voice casual as she nodded slightly toward the blonde. Jonathan followed her gaze, and for just a moment, so brief she might have imagined it, his steps faltered. "That's Victoria Ashford. She runs the Ashford Foundation. We've worked together on several charity initiatives." Something in his tone made Amara look more closely at Victoria, who was now talking to a group of women but whose eyes kept drifting back to the dance floor. Back to Jonathan. There was a familiarity in her gaze that spoke of shared secrets, of intimate knowledge that extended far beyond professional collaboration. "She's beautiful," Amara said, testing the waters. "I suppose," Jonathan replied, but his voice carried a distance that hadn't been there moments before. "You're the only beautiful woman I see tonight." It was exactly the right thing to say, delivered with exactly the right amount of conviction. So why did it feel rehearsed? The song ended to polite applause, and Jonathan kissed her hand with courtly flourish before leading her back to the head table. The rest of the evening passed in a whirlwind of toasts, cake cutting, and more networking disguised as celebration. Amara played her part perfectly. The grateful bride, the perfect wife, the woman who had won the ultimate prize in Manhattan's marriage market. But as midnight approached and the last guests began to filter out into the cool October night, she found herself feeling more alone than she had in months. Jonathan was still working the room, exchanging business cards and making plans for golf games and dinner meetings. This was her wedding day, but it felt more like the launch of a merger than the beginning of a marriage. "Darling, I've arranged for the penthouse suite at the plaza," Jonathan said when he finally returned to her side. His hand rested possessively on her lower back as he spoke to the last lingering guests. "We'll have champagne waiting, and tomorrow we fly to Santorini for 2 weeks of pure paradise." The Plaza penthouse. Another perfect detail in their perfect life. Amara smiled and nodded, accepting the congratulations and well wishes as they made their way to the waiting Bentley. Rice and rose petals showered down on them as they ducked into the back seat, and Jonathan's hand found hers as the car pulled away from the estate. "We did it," he said, bringing her knuckles to his lips. "Mr. and Mrs. Thornfield." "We did," she agreed, settling back against the leather seats. Through the tinted windows, she watched the lights of Manhattan blur past, each one representing lives being lived with honest emotion rather than calculated performance. As they rode in comfortable silence toward their wedding night, Amara couldn't shake the image of Victoria Ashford's knowing smile or the way Jonathan's entire demeanor had shifted when he'd seen her. She told herself she was being paranoid, that wedding day nerves were making her imagine problems that didn't exist. After all, she was now Mrs. Jonathan Thornfield III. She had achieved something that hundreds of women in Manhattan had dreamed of but never accomplished. She should be the happiest woman alive. So why did she feel like she had just signed a contract rather than exchanged vows of love? The Bentley pulled up to the plaza's private entrance, where a red carpet had been laid out and hotel staff waited to escort them to their suite. Jonathan helped her from the car, his hand warm and possessive on her arm as they walked through the marble lobby toward the private elevator that would take them to their wedding night. "Ready for the real celebration to begin?" he asked, his voice dropping to that husky tone that had made her weak in the knees during their courtship. Amara nodded, forcing herself to push away the doubts that had been growing throughout the evening. This was her husband, her new life, her chance at the kind of happiness she'd never dared to dream of growing up in Brooklyn. Whatever shadows she thought she'd seen were just that, shadows insubstantial and meaningless. As the elevator doors closed and they rose toward the penthouse, she had no idea that in less than 4 hours, those shadows would become a harsh and brutal reality that would shatter not just her heart, but her entire understanding of the man she had married. The elevator chimed softly as they reached the top floor, and Jonathan's hand tightened on hers as the doors opened to reveal their wedding suite, and the beginning of a night that would change everything. The penthouse suite at the plaza was a masterpiece of understated luxury, all cream silk and gleaming marble, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of Central Park bathed in moonlight. Rose petals had been scattered across the king-sized bed, champagne chilled in a crystal bucket, and soft jazz played from hidden speakers, every detail orchestrated to perfection for their wedding night. Jonathan loosened his bow tie as he moved to the champagne, his movements fluid and confident. "Dom Perignon 1996, he said, lifting the bottle with reverence. "I've been saving it for a special occasion." Amara kicked off her Jimmy Choo heels, feeling the plush carpet beneath her feet as she moved to the window. The city sprawled below them, a glittering tapestry of lights and dreams, of lives being lived in apartments and penthouses, in love and loneliness. She pressed her palm against the cool glass, watching her reflection merge with the cityscape. "It's beautiful," she murmured, though she wasn't sure if she meant the view or the suite or the moment itself. The pop of the champagne cork made her turn, and Jonathan was there with 2 flutes, bubbles rising like tiny prayers toward the rim. His smile was soft, more genuine than any she'd seen from him all evening, and for a moment she felt the doubts that had been gnawing at her begin to dissolve. "To us," he said, touching his glass to hers. "To Mrs. Amara Thornfield and the beginning of our beautiful life together." The champagne was crisp and perfect, just like everything else about this night, this suite, this life she was stepping into. Jonathan set down his glass and moved behind her, his hands finding the tiny pearl buttons that ran down the spine of her dress. "You were magnificent tonight," he whispered against her neck, his breath warm against her skin. "Every man in that room was envious of me." His fingers worked the buttons with surprising skill, and Amara felt the dress begin to loosen around her shoulders. She should have been melting into his touch, lost in the romance of their wedding night, but something felt mechanical, rehearsed, like he was playing a role he'd perfected through repetition. "Jonathan," she began, turning in his arms, but he silenced her with a kiss that tasted of champagne and promises. When they broke apart, his eyes were darker, more focused, and she recognized the look. It was the same intensity he brought to business negotiations. "I need to make a quick call," he said suddenly, stepping back and reaching for his phone. "Just tying up some loose ends from tonight. Give me 5 minutes." Before she could respond, he was already moving toward the suite's living area, phone pressed to his ear. His voice dropped to a murmur she couldn't quite catch, but there was an urgency to it that seemed out of place on their wedding night. Amara stood alone in the bedroom, her dress half undone, feeling suddenly exposed in more ways than one. Through the open doorway, she could see Jonathan pacing, one hand running through his perfectly styled hair in a gesture she'd learned meant he was stressed or agitated about something. She moved closer to the doorway, not quite eavesdropping but unable to ignore the tension in his voice. The words she caught made her blood run cold. "Can't wait until tomorrow. Need to see you tonight. I know it's complicated, but..." Her heart began to pound, each beat echoing in her ears like thunder. She pressed herself against the wall, straining to hear more, hoping desperately that she was misunderstanding, that her paranoid mind was creating problems where none existed. "The Plaza penthouse suite. She'll be asleep by 2. Yes, I'm sure." The phone call ended, and Amara heard Jonathan's footsteps approaching. She quickly moved away from the doorway, pretending to examine the rose petals on the bed, but her hands were shaking and her mind was reeling. "Sorry about that," Jonathan said as he returned, his business smile firmly back in place. "Just some international clients who don't understand time zones." He was lying. She could see it in the way his eyes didn't quite meet hers, in the slight tension around his mouth that she'd learned to recognize during their courtship. But more than that, she could feel it, that cold certainty that settles in your stomach when your worst fears are confirmed. "Of course," she managed, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside her chest. Jonathan moved to the champagne bucket, refilling both their glasses with movements that seemed too casual, too calculated. "You know, darling, the day has been so overwhelming. Maybe we should just relax tonight, let the anticipation build. Tomorrow in Santorini, we'll have all the time in the world." The suggestion should have been romantic, considerate even. Instead, it felt like a chess move, a way to position her exactly where he needed her to be. Asleep. Out of the way. Unaware. "You're probably right," she said carefully, watching his face for any tell, any crack in the facade. "I am exhausted." Relief flickered across his features so quickly she almost missed it. "Perfect. I might step out for a bit. Clear my head, you know? Wedding days are intense, even for the groom." Step out. On their wedding night. To clear his head. "Where would you go at this hour?" she asked, trying to keep her tone light, curious rather than suspicious. "Just down to the bar. Maybe walk around the block. I won't be long." Another lie, delivered with the same smooth confidence he used in boardrooms. Amara nodded and smiled, playing the understanding wife while her heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. "Take your time," she said. "I'll probably be asleep when you get back." "You're amazing," he said, kissing her forehead with what felt like genuine gratitude. "I don't deserve you." Finally, she thought, something we can agree on. After Jonathan left, Amara sat on the edge of the bed in her half-undone wedding dress, staring at her reflection in the mirror across the room. The woman looking back at her was a stranger. Hair perfectly styled, makeup flawless despite the long day, wearing a gown that cost more than her mother made in a year. She looked like she belonged in this world of penthouse suites and champagne toasts, but inside she felt like that 7-year-old girl in Brooklyn watching her father walk away without a backward glance. She wanted to cry, to rage, to throw something expensive against the wall and watch it shatter. Instead, she stood up and walked to the window, watching the city that had promised her so much and delivered a nightmare dressed as a dream. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. Amara's mind raced through possibilities, each one worse than the last. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe he really had gone for a walk, really was downstairs at the bar nursing a whiskey and contemplating married life. Maybe her suspicious nature, forged by growing up poor and hungry and always waiting for the next disappointment, was creating demons where none existed. Then she heard voices in the hallway outside their suite. Her heart stopped. She recognized Jonathan's laugh, that particular rumble he made when he was genuinely amused rather than performing amusement. And there was another voice, softer, feminine, familiar in a way that made her stomach clench with dread. Amara moved to the door on silent feet, pressing her ear against the wood. The voices were clearer now, close enough that they must be right outside. "Missed you so much during the ceremony," the woman was saying. "Watching you marry her was torture." "I know, baby. I know. But we have to be careful. Just until I can figure out how to." "How to what, Jonathan? You're married now. What exactly are you figuring out?" The woman's voice was sharper now, and Amara's blood turned to ice as she recognized it. Victoria Ashford. The blonde in the red dress who had watched Jonathan during their first dance with knowing eyes. "Victoria, please. You know this doesn't change anything between us. The marriage is just... it's strategic. Her connections, her background, it plays well for the family image. You know the board has been pushing for me to settle down, show some stability." Strategic. Family image. The words hit Amara like physical blows, each one confirming her worst fears about their entire relationship. "So what am I supposed to be, Jonathan? Your dirty little secret? The woman you sneak around with while you playhouse with your perfect wife?" "It's not like that, and you know it. You're the one I love. You're the one I want to be with. This thing with Amara, it's temporary. Just until I consolidate my position with the company, maybe have a kid to satisfy my mother's expectations. Then I can arrange a quiet divorce, settle her with enough money to keep her happy and quiet." Amara's legs gave out, and she slid down the door until she was sitting on the marble floor, her wedding dress pooling around her like spilled milk. The conversation continued, but the words seemed to come from underwater, distorted and distant. A kid to satisfy his mother's expectations. She was breeding stock, a strategic acquisition designed to produce the next generation of Thornfield heirs while he continued his real relationship with the woman he actually loved. The hallway fell silent, and Amara realized with growing horror that they were entering the suite. She scrambled to her feet, her mind racing through options. She could confront them, scream and rage and demand explanations. She could pretend to be asleep and gather more evidence. She could run, flee back to Brooklyn and her mother's small apartment and try to pretend this night had never happened. Instead, she found herself moving toward the bedroom's walk-in closet, slipping inside just as she heard the suite's front door open. Through the partially open closet door, she had a clear view of the bedroom and the living area beyond. Jonathan entered first, his bow tie undone and his hair slightly mussed. Behind him came Victoria, and seeing her in the soft lighting of their wedding suite was like being stabbed with a rusty knife. She was even more beautiful than Amara had realized. Tall and elegant with the kind of effortless grace that spoke of private schools and country clubs and summers in the Hamptons. "God, I've wanted to do this all day," Victoria breathed, pulling Jonathan into a kiss that was nothing like the careful, camera-ready kisses he'd given Amara throughout their courtship. This was raw, desperate, full of genuine passion that made Amara's chest ache with the knowledge that she had never been kissed like that by her own husband. How do you think someone should handle discovering their deepest fears about their relationship are true? What would you do in Amara's position? Jonathan's hands tangled in Victoria's blonde hair as he backed her toward the bed, the same bed where rose petals waited for his wedding night with Amara. "I hated every minute of today," he said against Victoria's lips. "Standing there, saying those words to her when all I wanted was to be with you. Then why did you do it?" Victoria's voice was smaller now, vulnerable in a way that made Amara realize this woman was suffering too, caught in Jonathan's web of manipulation just like she was. "You know why. The Ashford Foundation Board expects their directors to be married, stable." My trust fund has conditions. I need to be married by 35 to access the full inheritance. And Amara. He paused, and Amara held her breath, waiting for him to say something, anything, that might indicate she meant more to him than a strategic acquisition. What about her? She's perfect on paper. Right background story for the media. Poor girl makes good, American dream stuff. She's smart enough to be useful, beautiful enough to photograph well, and grateful enough to stay in line. Plus, she actually believes she loves me, which makes her easier to control. The casual cruelty of his words hit Amara like a physical blow. She pressed her hand to her mouth to keep from making a sound, tears streaming down her face and ruining the makeup that had taken 2 hours to perfect. Victoria pulled back from his embrace, and even in her heartbreak, Amara could see the conflict on the other woman's face. This is wrong, Jonathan. She doesn't deserve this. Deserve what? A life of luxury? Access to society that she never could have achieved on her own? I'm giving her more than she ever dreamed of. You're giving her a lie. I'm giving her what she wanted, the Thornfield name, the Thornfield money, the Thornfield lifestyle. What difference does it make if I don't love her? Most marriages in our circle are business arrangements anyway. Jonathan moved to the champagne bucket, pouring 2 fresh glasses as if they were in his own apartment rather than the suite he was supposed to be sharing with his new wife. Victoria sank onto the edge of the bed, her red dress a slash of color against the white bedding. What happens when she finds out? Victoria asked quietly. She won't. And even if she does, what's she going to do? Go back to Brooklyn? She's tasted this life now. The money, the power, the status. She'll do whatever it takes to keep it, including looking the other way when I need some real companionship. You don't know her very well, do you? Victoria's voice carried a note of something that might have been respect or warning. Jonathan laughed, that cold sound Amara had heard him use with business rivals he was about to destroy. I know her type. Hungry, ambitious, willing to compromise her principles for the right price. She's already proven that by marrying me knowing damn well she doesn't belong in this world. Maybe you're underestimating her. Trust me, Victoria. I've been playing this game my whole life. People are predictable when you understand what motivates them. Amara wants security, status, and wealth. As long as I provide those things, she'll be the perfect wife in public and stay out of my private life. In the closet, Amara wiped her tears with the back of her hand, something cold and hard crystallizing in her chest where her heart used to be. Jonathan thought he knew her, thought he could predict her reactions and control her responses like she was just another business acquisition to be managed. He was about to learn how wrong he was. Victoria stood and moved to the window, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. I should go. This feels too much like a betrayal. Of who? Her. She married me for my money, Victoria. This isn't some great love story. It's a transaction. And the sooner you accept that, the easier this will be for all of us. Jonathan moved behind Victoria, his hands settling on her shoulders in a gesture that was both possessive and tender. Everything his touches with Amara had never been. I love you, he said simply. I've loved you since we were teenagers sneaking around your father's estate. That hasn't changed, and it never will. Then why didn't you marry me? Because you don't need me, and she does. Because your family already has enough money and influence. Because marrying you would have been too easy, too expected. This way, I get the best of both worlds. A wife will give me the stability and image I need, and the woman I actually love waiting for me when I need to remember what real passion feels like. The calculation in his voice, the casual way he discussed manipulating both their lives, made Amara's remaining illusions crumble to dust. She had married a sociopath, a man who saw people as chess pieces to be moved around for his benefit. Victoria turned in his arms, and Amara could see tears glittering on her cheeks. This is going to destroy us all, Jonathan. You can't keep living a lie forever. Watch me, he said, and kissed her again with the kind of desperate hunger that Amara had never seen from him, not even during their most intimate moments. As she watched her husband of 6 hours make love to another woman on their wedding night, using endearments and showing passion he had never shared with her, Amara felt something shift inside her chest. The pain was still there, sharp and bright and brutal, but underneath it was something else. Something harder. Something dangerous. Jonathan Thornfield thought he had married a grateful little poor girl who would be so overwhelmed by his wealth and status that she'd accept any treatment as long as the money kept flowing. He thought he could use her as a broodmare and a public relations tool while conducting his real life with his real love in secret. He thought she was predictable, controllable, manageable. He had no idea who he had really married. As Victoria and Jonathan lost themselves in each other mere feet from where Amara hid, she began to plan. Not her escape. That would be too easy, too expected. Instead, she began to plan Jonathan Thornfield's complete and total destruction. After all, he had taught her something valuable tonight. In his world, marriage really was just a business transaction. And Amara Thornfield, was about to prove she was much better at business than he had ever imagined. The couple on the bed were too absorbed in each other to notice the closet door closing with a whisper-soft click, or the way the shadows in the room seemed to shift as if something predatory had been awakened. In the darkness of the closet, surrounded by expensive suits that smelled like lies and cologne, Amara smiled for the first time since walking down the aisle. It wasn't a pleasant smile. Amara remained in the closet for what felt like hours, listening to the sounds of her husband's betrayal echo through their wedding suite. When Jonathan and Victoria finally fell asleep, limbs entangled on sheets that should have been hers, she slipped out like a ghost and moved to the living area where she could think clearly. The city lights painted shadows across her face as she sat in the darkness, still wearing her wedding dress, pearls catching the occasional flash from a passing car 20 floors below. Her hands were steady now, her tears dried. The shock had burned through her system like fever, leaving behind something cold and sharp and infinitely more dangerous than the heartbroken girl who had hidden in that closet. She pulled out her phone and began scrolling through her contacts, her mind already 3 moves ahead. Jonathan thought he was the only one who understood strategy, who knew how to manipulate people and situations to his advantage. But he had made a critical error. He had underestimated exactly what kind of woman he had married. Amara Sinclair hadn't clawed her way out of Brooklyn poverty by being naive or trusting. She had earned her MBA from Columbia not through privilege, but through brutal intelligence and an ability to read people that came from growing up with nothing. She had built her consulting career by understanding that information was power, that timing was everything, and that the most dangerous opponents were the ones who looked harmless. Jonathan was about to learn that his new wife had learned those lessons very well. Her first call was to Marcus Rodriguez, a private investigator she had used during her consulting days to conduct background checks on potential business partners. Marcus specialized in the kind of discreet inquiries that Manhattan's elite preferred to keep off the official books. Amara. Jesus, it's 3 a.m. Aren't you supposed to be on your honeymoon? Marcus's voice was groggy but sharpening quickly. He'd worked with her long enough to know she didn't make social calls. I need everything you can find on Victoria Ashford. Personal history, financial records, professional relationships, romantic connections. And I need it fast. There was a pause. Marcus had attended the wedding as a guest. She'd invited him because he'd become something of a friend over the years, one of the few people who knew where she really came from and didn't judge her for it. Amara, what's going on? Is everything okay? Everything's fine, she lied smoothly. I just need some information for a business matter. Can you do it or not? Of course I can do it. Give me 48 hours and I'll have everything down to her shoe size. But if you need help, real help, you know you can call me, right? The concern in his voice almost broke through her carefully constructed composure, but she couldn't afford weakness now. I'll be in touch. Her second call was to her assistant, Rebecca, who had worked for her consulting firm and had followed her into her new role as Mrs. Thornfield. Rebecca was young, ambitious, and possessed the kind of ruthless efficiency that Amara recognized in herself. Mrs. Thornfield? Is everything all right? Rebecca's voice was instantly alert despite the early hour. I need you to compile a complete financial analysis of the Thornfield empire. Holdings, investments, debt structures, cash flow, everything. Also, I want a full breakdown of the board of directors for all major subsidiaries. Personal information, voting patterns, potential pressure points. That's a significant request. It could take weeks to compile everything properly. You have 72 hours. And Rebecca. This stays between us. Completely confidential. Of course. May I ask what this is for? Amara watched the sun beginning to rise over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that reminded her of hope. But hope was a luxury she could no longer afford. Market research, she said simply. Her third call was the most difficult. She scrolled to her mother's number and hesitated, her finger hovering over the contact. Diane Sinclair would be getting ready for her morning shift at Brooklyn Methodist, probably drinking instant coffee from a chipped mug and wondering how her daughter's wedding night was going. "Mama," Amara said when her mother answered, and for a moment her voice almost broke. "Baby girl, what are you doing calling me at this hour? Shouldn't you be?" Diane's voice trailed off, and Amara could hear the exact moment when her mother's nursing instincts kicked in, recognizing distress even across the phone lines. "I'm fine, Mama. I wanted to hear your voice." "Amara, tell me what's wrong." Her mother had always been able to see through her facades, had always known when she was pretending to be stronger than she felt. It was both comforting and terrifying. "Nothing's wrong. I just realized I never thanked you properly. For everything you sacrificed to get me here. For working those double shifts. For believing I could be more than where we came from." "Oh, honey." Diane's voice was soft now, full of the kind of unconditional love that Amara realized she had been searching for in Jonathan's calculated affection. "You don't need to thank me for loving you. I know. But I wanted you to know that I remember. I remember all of it. And I remember what you taught me about not letting anyone make you feel small." "Did someone make you feel small, baby?" Amara looked toward the bedroom where her husband slept with his mistress and felt that cold hardness in her chest expand. "Someone tried to. But you raised me better than that." What do you think Amara's mother taught her about strength that will help her now? Share your thoughts on how childhood experiences shape our responses to betrayal. After she hung up, Amara sat in silence for several minutes, letting the conversation with her mother settle into her bones like armor. Diane Sinclair had raised her daughter to understand that respect was earned, not given, and that sometimes the people who seemed to have the most power were actually the most vulnerable because they had the most to lose. Jonathan Thornfield was about to learn that lesson the hard way. When the couple in the bedroom finally stirred around 9 in the morning, Amara was fully dressed in a crisp white blouse and navy slacks, her hair pulled back in a severe bun, sitting at the suite's dining table with her laptop open and financial reports spread around her like battle plans. She heard Victoria's voice first, hushed and urgent. "I should go. What if she wakes up?" "She's a heavy sleeper," Jonathan replied dismissively. "And even if she wasn't, what could she do? Throw a tantrum? Threaten divorce? She needs this marriage more than I do." The bedroom door opened and Victoria emerged first, her red dress from the night before wrinkled and her hair mussed. She froze when she saw Amara sitting calmly at the table, and the blood drained from her face. "Good morning, Victoria," Amara said pleasantly, not looking up from her laptop. "Coffee's fresh if you'd like some." Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a fish, but no sound came out. Jonathan appeared behind her, pulling on his shirt from the night before, and stopped dead when he saw his wife sitting there as composed as if she were conducting a board meeting. "Amara." His voice was carefully controlled, but she could see the calculation in his eyes as he tried to assess how much she had seen, how much she knew, how much damage control would be required. "Darling," she replied, finally looking up with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You missed breakfast. I had the most interesting conversation with room service about their overnight guest policy. Apparently, they're very discreet about additional visitors to the penthouse suites. For the right price, of course." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Victoria looked like she might be sick, but Jonathan's expression hardened into something that reminded Amara why his business rivals feared him. "Victoria was just leaving," he said smoothly. "We had some foundation business to discuss." "At 3 in the morning? On our wedding night?" Amara's voice remained pleasant, conversational. "How dedicated of you both." Victoria found her voice finally. "Amara, I'm so sorry. This isn't. It's not what you think." "Isn't it?" Amara closed her laptop and stood, moving to the coffee service with fluid grace. What I think, Victoria, is that you're a woman in love with a man who's using you just as much as he's using me. What I think is that you're as much a victim here as I am. The unexpected sympathy in her voice seemed to hit Victoria harder than anger would have. Tears began streaming down her face as the full weight of the situation crashed over her. I loved him first, Victoria whispered. We've been together for 3 years. I thought he would marry me. But you don't need him to marry you, do you? Amara's voice was gentle, understanding. You have your own money, your own foundation, your own social standing. You don't need the Thornfield name to validate your existence. Victoria's tears came harder now, and Amara felt an unexpected pang of sympathy for the other woman. They were both casualties in Jonathan's war of acquisition and control. Jonathan, however, was clearly growing tired of the emotional scene. Enough, he said sharply. Victoria, go home. We'll talk later. No, Amara said quietly, and something in her tone made both of them freeze. Victoria should stay. We have things to discuss. Amara, Jonathan started, but she cut him off with a look that could have frozen hellfire. Sit down, Jonathan. Both of you. Now. There was something in her voice that commanded obedience, a steel that neither of them had heard from her before. Victoria sank into one of the dining chairs like her legs had given out, while Jonathan remained standing, his jaw clenched with barely contained anger. I said sit down. This time he obeyed, perhaps recognizing that this was no longer the grateful, malleable woman he thought he had married. Amara remained standing, moving to the window where she could see Central Park stretching out below them like a green oasis in the concrete jungle. When she spoke, her voice was calm, almost meditative. Do you know what the most valuable lesson I learned growing up poor was? It wasn't about money, though that's important. It wasn't about ambition, though that matters too. It was about information. She turned to face them, and her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Information is the only real currency that matters. Everything else, money, power, status, can be taken away. But information? That's forever. Jonathan's face had gone pale. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that I know everything, Jonathan. About your trust fund conditions. About Victoria's foundation board requirements. About your little arrangement where you get the perfect wife for public consumption while maintaining your real relationship in private. She paused, letting the words sink in. I'm talking about the fact that I recorded every word of your conversation last night. The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria's face went white as fresh snow, while Jonathan's expression cycled through disbelief, rage, and finally, fear. You're lying, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Amara pulled out her phone and tapped the screen. Jonathan's voice filled the room crystal clear. She's perfect on paper. Right background story for the media. Poor girl makes good, American dream stuff. She's smart enough to be useful, beautiful enough to photograph well, and grateful enough to stay in line. Plus, she actually believes she loves me, which makes her easier to control. Victoria made a sound like a wounded animal, but Jonathan's face had turned to stone. What do you want? Nothing you aren't already planning to give me, Amara replied sweetly. A marriage. A child, eventually. The Thornfield name and all that comes with it. She moved closer to the table, her movements predatory. The only difference is that now we're both going to be honest about what this is. A business arrangement. A mutually beneficial contract. And if I refuse? Amara's laugh was genuinely amused. Oh, darling. You're not going to refuse. Because I know about the Henderson deal that's been keeping you awake at night. The one where you've been using foundation money to cover gaps in your personal investments. The one that could send you to prison if the SEC takes a close look at it. Jonathan's face went ashen. That's impossible. No one knows about that. I know about it. Just like I know about the shell companies in the Cayman Islands. Just like I know about the stock manipulation scheme you've been running through your mother's charitable trust. Just like I know about the bribes you've been paying to city council members to get those zoning variances for the Brooklyn Development Project. Each revelation hit like a physical blow, and Amara watched with satisfaction as Jonathan's carefully constructed world began to crumble around him. She had spent her wedding night well, using her business connections and her considerable skills to dig into every dark corner of the Thornfield empire. "How?" he whispered. "You married a woman who built her career on finding people's secrets. Jonathan, did you really think I wouldn't be good at it?" Victoria looked between them like she was watching a tennis match played with grenades. "What happens now?" Amara turned to her, and her expression softened slightly. "That depends on you, Victoria. You can walk away from this, cut your losses, and find someone who actually deserves your love. Or you can stay trapped in this web of lies and manipulation, waiting for a man who will never choose you over his own interests." "And you?" Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm going to be the perfect Mrs. Thornfield. I'm going to smile for the cameras, host charity galas, and give him the beautiful, successful heir he needs to satisfy his board of directors. And in return, he's going to give me access to every corner of his business empire." Jonathan found his voice finally. "So you can destroy it." "So I can improve it," Amara corrected. "You see, darling, you made one crucial mistake. You assumed I was just another gold digger looking for a meal ticket. What I actually am is a woman who understands how to build and run businesses better than you ever will. The Thornfield empire is going to flourish under my guidance. And you're going to let me do it because if you don't—" She didn't need to finish the threat. They all understood what the alternative was. Victoria stood on shaky legs. "I need to go. I need to think." "Victoria," Amara called as the other woman reached the door. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. You deserve better than this." After Victoria left, Jonathan and Amara stared at each other across the debris of their wedding morning. He looked older somehow, diminished, as if the careful facade he'd maintained for years had finally cracked beyond repair. "You can't possibly think this will work," he said finally. "I don't think it will work, Jonathan. I know it will. Because you're going to help me make it work." She moved to gather her papers, her movements brisk and businesslike. "We have a plane to catch. Santorini, wasn't it? 2 weeks of honeymooning for the cameras. And then we come home and begin building the life I actually want. Together." Her smile was razor sharp. "After all, you did promise to love, honor, and cherish me until death do us part. I intend to hold you to that promise." As they prepared to leave for their honeymoon, Amara felt a sense of satisfaction she hadn't expected. Jonathan had thought he was acquiring a grateful, controllable wife. Instead, he had gained a partner who was smarter, more ruthless, and infinitely more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The game was just beginning, and for the first time since she'd walked down that aisle, Amara was confident she was going to win. 6 months later, the Thornfield Foundation's annual gala was the social event of the Manhattan calendar, held in the grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Museum of Art surrounded by priceless artifacts and the city's most powerful elite. Amara stood at the edge of the marble steps leading into the main hall, watching 500 of New York's wealthiest citizens mingle beneath soaring ceilings and Renaissance masterpieces. She looked every inch the perfect society wife in her custom Valentino gown, midnight blue silk that hugged her curves before flowing into an elegant train, diamonds at her throat that had once belonged to a Russian princess. Her hair was styled in an elaborate updo that had taken 3 hours to perfect, and her smile was radiant as she greeted senators, CEOs, and foreign dignitaries with the practiced grace of someone born to this life. But beneath the flawless exterior, Amara was a predator preparing to strike. "Darling, you look stunning tonight," Jonathan murmured as he approached, resplendent in his custom tuxedo. To any observer, they were the perfect power couple. Young, beautiful, successful, madly in love. 6 months of marriage had given them both plenty of practice at the performance. "Thank you," she replied, accepting the kiss he pressed to her cheek with practiced warmth. "Everything is ready. The presentation is loaded, the board members are all here, and the media is positioned exactly where you wanted them." His voice carried undertones of resignation that would have been undetectable to anyone who didn't know him as well as she had learned to. The past 6 months had been a masterclass in psychological warfare disguised as marital bliss. Their honeymoon in Santorini had been photographed extensively for Vanity Fair and Town and Country, showing the happy couple exploring ancient ruins and sailing crystal-clear waters. What the cameras hadn't captured were the late-night strategy sessions where Amara had systematically dismantled Jonathan's business empire and rebuilt it according to her vision. She had started small, suggesting improvements to investment portfolios that yielded unexpected returns, introducing him to contacts from her consulting days who opened doors to new markets, proposing charitable initiatives that enhanced the Thornfield reputation while creating tax advantages. Jonathan had been suspicious at first, but greed was a powerful motivator. When her suggestions consistently generated profits, his resistance had crumbled. Now, 6 months later, Amara effectively controlled 40% of the Thornfield empire's day-to-day operations. The board members trusted her judgment, the press loved her rags-to-riches story, and even Vivian Thornfield had begun treating her with something approaching respect. Jonathan still thought he was using her. He had no idea how completely the tables had turned. Mrs. Thornfield, Margaret Astor, the society columnist for the New York Times, approached with her photographer in tow. "You look absolutely radiant. Marriage clearly agrees with you." "Thank you, Margaret. I'm blessed to have found my perfect partner." Amara's hand found Jonathan's arm, her touch appearing affectionate while actually being possessive. "We make quite a team." "Speaking of teams, I understand you've been very involved in the Foundation's operations lately. Quite a change from the traditional role of a Thornfield wife." The comment was pointed, a reference to the whispers that had followed Amara's increasingly public role in the family business. Traditional society wives were expected to host parties and raise funds, not sit in boardrooms making strategic decisions. "Times change," Amara replied smoothly. "The Foundation's mission is too important to limit ourselves to outdated conventions. When you have the opportunity to make a real difference in people's lives, you take it." "And your husband supports this modern approach?" Jonathan's smile was perfect, even though Amara could feel the tension in his arm beneath her fingers. "Amara has brilliant insights that have already improved our operations significantly. I'd be a fool not to listen to her." After the reporter moved on, Jonathan leaned close to her ear. "You could try to be a little less obvious about running the show." "Worried about your masculine pride, darling?" Her voice was honey over steel. "Don't be. Tonight everyone will remember why you're the man in charge." The irony in her tone wasn't lost on him, but before he could respond, the evening's program began. They moved to their seats at the head table, where Amara could survey the room like a general reviewing her troops. Marcus Rodriguez caught her eye from across the room and gave an almost imperceptible nod. He was here as her guest, officially to support the Foundation's work with veterans' charities. Unofficially, he was here to witness the culmination of 6 months of careful planning. Victoria Ashford was notably absent. After their confrontation at the plaza, she had ended her relationship with Jonathan and resigned from her position at the Ashford Foundation. The last Amara had heard, Victoria was living in London, working for an international children's charity and, according to Marcus's reports, dating a British parliamentarian who actually seemed to value her for more than her social connections. Good for her, Amara thought. At least one of them had found the courage to escape. The evening's program proceeded flawlessly through dinner and the usual round of speeches from board members and beneficiaries. Finally, it was time for the main event, Jonathan's presentation on the Foundation's 5-year strategic plan, the plan that Amara had crafted with surgical precision to destroy him. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jonathan began, his voice carrying easily through the ballroom sound system. "Tonight I want to share with you our vision for the future of the Thornfield Foundation and our family's commitment to serving our community." The lights dimmed and a massive screen descended behind the podium. Amara watched Jonathan's face carefully as the first slide appeared. Not the presentation he had rehearsed, but something entirely different. Thornfield Foundation, a legacy of corruption. The title slide hung in the air like a guillotine blade, and Amara saw the exact moment when Jonathan realized what was happening. His face went ashen, but years of public speaking training kept him upright at the podium even as his world collapsed around him. The next slide showed financial records, meticulously documented evidence of every illegal transaction, every bribe, every instance of embezzlement that Amara had uncovered during their marriage. Bank statements, wire transfers, shell company formations, all laid out with the precision of a prosecutor's closing argument. The room erupted in gasps and murmurs as the magnitude of what they were seeing became clear. Board members were pulling out their phones, reporters were frantically taking notes, and several people were already heading for the exits. This isn't. Jonathan started, but his voice cracked. He turned to look at Amara, and she met his gaze with a smile that was pure predatory satisfaction. The presentation continued automatically, each slide revealing another layer of Jonathan's criminal activities. The bribes to city council members, the manipulation of stock prices through the charitable trust, the use of foundation money to cover personal investment losses, the shell companies in the Cayman Islands designed to hide assets from tax authorities. What do you think drives someone to seek justice through public exposure rather than private revenge? Is there a difference between justice and vengeance? Ladies and gentlemen, Amara's voice cut through the chaos as she stood and moved to the podium, gently but firmly displacing her husband. I apologize for this disruption, but I felt you all deserved to know the truth about how your donations have been used. Jonathan tried to speak, but no sound came out. He looked like a man watching his own execution, powerless to stop the proceedings. 6 months ago, I discovered these irregularities in our financial records, Amara continued, her voice steady and professional. As a board member and as someone who believes deeply in this foundation's mission, I felt it was my duty to investigate further. The lie came easily. She had been investigating Jonathan since their wedding night, but the board didn't need to know that. What mattered was that she appeared to be the whistleblower, the honest wife who had discovered her husband's crimes and chosen duty over loyalty. I want to assure you all that these activities will cease immediately. I have already contacted the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division, and they will be conducting a full investigation. In the meantime, the Foundation's board will be implementing new oversight procedures to ensure this never happens again. The room was in chaos now. Board members were demanding explanations, reporters were shouting questions, and security guards were moving to establish some semblance of order. In the middle of it all, Jonathan stood frozen at the podium like a deer caught in headlights. Furthermore, Amara continued, her voice somehow carrying over the din, I want to announce my intention to run for chairman of the Foundation's board. Someone needs to rebuild the trust that has been broken tonight, and I believe my background in strategic consulting and my commitment to transparency make me the right person for that role. It was a masterful performance. In the space of 10 minutes, she had destroyed Jonathan's reputation, positioned herself as the hero of the story, and maneuvered herself into position to take control of the entire Thornfield charitable empire. Margaret Astor fought her way through the crowd to reach Amara's side. Mrs. Thornfield, how long have you known about your husband's activities? I discovered the first irregularities 3 months ago, Amara replied, sticking to her carefully crafted timeline. I spent the following months gathering evidence and consulting with legal experts about the best way to proceed. This wasn't a decision I made lightly. Jonathan is my husband, and I love him. But the Foundation's mission is bigger than any one person, even someone I care about deeply. The performance was Oscar-worthy. She managed to sound both heartbroken and determined, loyal yet principled. The cameras ate it up. Jonathan finally found his voice. Amara, we need to talk. Now. I think you've said enough for one evening, she replied coolly. Your lawyers will be in touch about the divorce proceedings. The word divorce sent another ripple of excitement through the crowd. This wasn't just a financial scandal anymore. It was a full-blown society drama with betrayal, crime, and a wronged wife seeking justice. You can't do this, Jonathan said, his voice low and desperate. We had an agreement. We did. Amara agreed pleasantly. You agreed to love, honor, and cherish me. You agreed to be faithful. You agreed to be honest. You broke every single one of those agreements, so I'm breaking mine. Security guards were moving toward the podium now, clearly unsure whether they should be protecting Jonathan or arresting him. Amara stepped down from the stage and began moving through the crowd, accepting condolences and answering questions with the grace of a woman who had found strength in adversity. Mrs. Thornfield, a reporter from CNN, pushed through the crowd. What will you do now? Will you remain involved with the Foundation? "The Foundation's work is too important to abandon," she replied. "These communities need our support now more than ever. I won't let my husband's crimes derail the good work this organization can do." "And personally, how are you handling this betrayal?" For just a moment, Amara let her mask slip, showing a flash of the pain that had driven her to this moment. "It's devastating to learn that the person you trusted most in the world has been lying to you. But I was raised to believe that doing the right thing matters more than protecting yourself from pain." It was perfect. Vulnerable enough to be sympathetic, strong enough to be inspiring. The story would write itself. Brave wife exposes billionaire husband's crimes, chooses justice over loyalty. As the evening dissolved into chaos, Amara made her way to the museum's exit, accepting expressions of support and admiration from the shocked guests. Jonathan was surrounded by lawyers and reporters, his carefully constructed world crumbling in real time. Outside, Marcus was waiting by a black sedan, his expression unreadable. "Well?" she asked as she settled into the back seat. "The FBI is already moving. They've been investigating some of these activities for months. Your evidence just gave them everything they needed for warrants. He'll be arrested within the hour." Amara nodded, feeling a satisfaction so deep it was almost spiritual. "And the board vote? Scheduled for next week. After tonight's performance, you'll be elected chairman by unanimous consent. No one wants to be seen supporting Jonathan's legacy." "Good." She looked out the window at the museum's lit facade, where confused guests were still streaming out into the night. "Take me home." "Which home? The penthouse or—" "Brooklyn," she said firmly. "I want to see my mother." As the car pulled away from the museum, Amara allowed herself a small smile of triumph. Jonathan Thornfield had thought he could use her as a pawn in his games of power and manipulation. Instead, she had turned his own strategies against him, using his arrogance and his underestimation of her as weapons to destroy him completely. The game was over, and she had won more decisively than she had ever dared to imagine. But the real victory wasn't the money or the power or the foundation she would now control. The real victory was the knowledge that she had refused to be diminished, refused to accept less than she deserved, refused to let someone else's view of her worth become her own. Jonathan Thornfield had tried to make her small. Instead, she had made herself magnificent. Behind them, the lights of Manhattan glittered like fallen stars, and Amara Thornfield, soon to be Amara Sinclair again, felt the future stretching out before her like an open road. For the first time since her wedding day, she was exactly where she belonged. 2 years later, the morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the corner office on the 42nd floor of the Sinclair Foundation building, casting golden rectangles across the polished marble floor. Amara stood at her desk, reviewing the quarterly reports that showed another record-breaking year of charitable giving and community impact. The numbers were impressive, but what made her smile was the knowledge that every dollar was being used exactly as intended, to lift people up rather than line corrupt pockets. "Ma'am." Rebecca Chen, her chief of staff, appeared in the doorway with a tablet and the focused expression that meant important business. "The Forbes reporter is here for your interview, and the senator's office called to confirm your lunch meeting about the education bill." Amara nodded, straightening the jacket of her charcoal gray Armani suit. The designer clothing was still present in her wardrobe, but now it served a different purpose. Armor for the battles she fought in boardrooms and congressional offices, tools to be taken seriously in rooms where powerful men made decisions that affected millions of lives. "Send the reporter in. And Rebecca, make sure we have those literacy program statistics ready. I want her to understand the scope of what we're accomplishing." The past 2 years had transformed Amara from society wife to power broker in her own right. The Thornfield Foundation had been renamed and restructured under her leadership, becoming the Sinclair Foundation and growing into one of the most influential charitable organizations in the country. What had started as revenge against Jonathan had evolved into something much more meaningful, a chance to actually change lives on a scale she had never imagined possible. The divorce had been swift and brutal. Jonathan's legal troubles had given her tremendous leverage in the settlement negotiations, and she had walked away with enough assets to fund her foundation independently. She kept the Thornfield name professionally for recognition purposes, but legally she was Amara Sinclair again, the name that belonged to the woman she had become rather than the woman she had been forced to pretend to be. Ms. Thornfield. The Forbes reporter was young and eager, clearly excited to be interviewing one of the magazine's 40 Under 40 honorees. Thank you so much for making time. I know your schedule is incredibly busy. Please, call me Amara. And it's my pleasure. The work we're doing here deserves attention. As they settled into the conversation area of her office, designed to be impressive but not intimidating, with photographs on the wall showing children in newly built schools and families in affordable housing developments, Amara reflected on how different her life had become from the hollow luxury of her marriage. Let's start with the obvious question, the reporter said, pulling out her recorder. 2 years ago, you were known primarily as the wife who exposed her billionaire husband's corruption. Today, you're running one of the most successful foundations in the country and being talked about as a potential candidate for political office. How did you make that transformation? Amara had answered variations of this question hundreds of times, but she still took a moment to consider her response. The easy answer was to talk about her business background and natural leadership abilities. The true answer was more complex. I think crisis reveals who we really are, she said finally. When my world fell apart, I had a choice. I could retreat, feel sorry for myself, and live quietly on my divorce settlement. Or I could use what I had learned about power and influence to actually help people who were facing the same kinds of struggles I grew up with. You've been very open about your childhood in Brooklyn. Do you think that background gives you a different perspective than other philanthropists? Absolutely. When you've been hungry, you understand what food insecurity really means. When you've watched your mother work 3 jobs just to keep a roof over your head, you understand why affordable housing matters. When you've seen talented kids unable to pursue their dreams because of student debt, you understand why education funding is crucial. Amara's voice carried the passion that had made her a sought-after speaker at policy conferences. Philanthropy can't just be about writing checks to make yourself feel better. It has to be about systemic change. The interview continued for another hour, covering the Foundation's major initiatives, Amara's leadership philosophy, and the rumors about her potential run for Congress. When the reporter finally left, Amara felt the familiar satisfaction that came from knowing her story was being told on her own terms. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Rodriguez. Lunch tomorrow? Have some interesting news about our mutual friend. Their mutual friend was Jonathan, who had been released from federal prison 6 months ago after serving 18 months for fraud and embezzlement. His sentence had been relatively light thanks to his cooperation with authorities and his family's expensive legal team, but his reputation was irreparably destroyed. The Thornfield name, once synonymous with power and prestige, was now associated with corruption and scandal. Amara had kept tabs on his situation through Marcus, not out of lingering attachment but out of simple pragmatism. Jonathan was intelligent and vindictive, and she wanted to be prepared if he tried to cause problems for her foundation or her reputation. Mrs. Thornfield. Rebecca appeared again, this time looking slightly flustered. There's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's personal. Victoria Ashford. Amara felt a flicker of surprise. She hadn't seen or spoken to Victoria since that morning at the plaza, though she had occasionally wondered how the other woman was doing. Marcus's reports had indicated that Victoria was thriving in London, but what was she doing in New York? Send her in. Victoria looked different, healthier, more confident, her blonde hair shorter and her style more relaxed. She wore a simple blue dress and minimal jewelry, a far cry from the designer perfection she had maintained as a Manhattan socialite. But there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Peace. Amara, you look powerful. Victoria's smile was genuine, with none of the nervous energy that had characterized their last meeting. You look happy, Amara replied and meant it. Please sit. Can I offer you coffee? Tea. Coffee would be lovely, thank you. Victoria settled into one of the chairs facing Amara's desk, her movements relaxed and confident. I wanted to come see you before I leave New York. I'm flying back to London tomorrow. How is London treating you? Wonderfully. The work with Save the Children has been incredibly fulfilling. And Victoria's smile became shy, almost girlish. I'm engaged. To a man who actually loves me for who I am, not what I can do for his career." "That's wonderful," Amara said, and was surprised to realize she meant it. Whatever anger she had felt toward Victoria had long since faded, replaced by a kind of sisterly understanding. They had both been casualties of Jonathan's manipulation, both strong women who had been diminished by a man who saw them as objects rather than people. "I owe you an apology," Victoria continued. "And a thank you." "You don't owe me anything." "I do. I was complicit in hurting you, and I'm sorry for that. But more than that." Victoria leaned forward, her expression earnest. "You saved me. What you did that night at the museum, exposing Jonathan publicly, it forced me to see him clearly for the first time, to see what he really was." Amara remembered the pain in Victoria's eyes that morning at the plaza, the way she had looked like a woman trapped in a cage of her own making. "You saved yourself. You're the one who had the courage to walk away and build a new life." "Maybe. But you showed me it was possible. You showed me that we didn't have to accept being diminished by someone else's selfishness." They talked for another hour, sharing stories of their new lives and the ways they had both grown beyond the women they had been in Jonathan's orbit. Victoria told her about her fiancé, a member of parliament who worked on refugee issues and treated her as an equal partner in every aspect of their relationship. Amara shared her plans for expanding the Foundation's international work and her growing interest in running for office. "Have you seen him?" Victoria asked as she prepared to leave. "Jonathan, I mean." "No. I've kept track of his situation, but we haven't had any contact since the divorce was finalized." Amara paused, considering how much to share. "He's been trying to rebuild his reputation. Small-scale consulting work, some speaking engagements about business ethics. The irony isn't lost on me. But he's essentially persona non grata in Manhattan society." "And how do you feel about that?" It was a question Amara had asked herself many times. The easy answer was that she felt vindicated, that justice had been served. But the truth was more complicated. "I feel free," she said finally. "For a long time I was angry, hurt, focused on making him pay for what he did to us. But at some point, that anger was just weighing me down. Now I barely think about him except when Marcus updates me for security reasons." Victoria nodded understanding. "That's how I knew I was ready to get married again. When I realized I could go entire days without thinking about Jonathan at all." After Victoria left, Amara stood at her office window looking out at the city that had once seemed so intimidating and foreign. Manhattan still glittered with wealth and power, but she understood now that those things were just tools. What mattered was how you used them. How do you think we know when we've truly moved on from a betrayal? Is it when we stop feeling angry, or when we stop feeling anything at all? Her phone rang, interrupting her contemplation. The caller ID showed her mother's number, and Amara smiled as she answered. "Hey, Mama. Baby girl, I just saw your interview on the news. You looked so confident, so strong. I'm proud of you." "Thank you. That means everything coming from you." "Are you happy?" Diane Sinclair asked the question with the directness that had always been her trademark. Really happy, not just successful. Amara considered the question seriously. Was she happy? Her life was fuller and more meaningful than she had ever imagined possible. She was making a real difference in people's lives, building something that would outlast her, using her skills and resources to address problems that had once seemed insurmountable. But there were lonely moments too. Evenings in her Tribeca penthouse when she wondered what it would be like to share her victories and challenges with someone who truly knew her. She had dated occasionally over the past 2 years, but nothing serious. The betrayal she had experienced with Jonathan had made her cautious about trusting anyone with her heart again. "I'm content," she said finally. "I'm doing work that matters, I'm financially secure, I have good people around me. I think happiness might be too much to ask for right now." "Nonsense," her mother said firmly. "You've earned the right to expect everything life has to offer. Don't let one bad man make you settle for less than you deserve." "I'm not settling, Mama. I'm just careful." "There's a difference between being careful and being closed off, baby. Make sure you know which one you're doing." After they hung up, Amara found herself thinking about her mother's words. Was she being careful, or was she hiding? The question followed her through the rest of her workday and into the evening. She was reviewing budget proposals in her home office when her doorman called to announce a visitor. "There's a gentleman here to see you, Ms. Sinclair. Says his name is David Chen. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's about the literacy initiative." David Chen. Amara knew the name. He was a policy analyst with the Department of Education who had been working with her foundation on expanding reading programs in underserved communities. They had exchanged emails and participated in conference calls, but had never met in person. Send him up. When her doorbell rang 10 minutes later, Amara opened it to find a man about her age with kind eyes and an apologetic smile. He was handsome in an understated way, tall and lean with dark hair and the kind of face that suggested intelligence and humor in equal measure. "Ms. Sinclair, I'm so sorry to bother you at home. I know this is highly irregular, but I was in the neighborhood and wanted to personally thank you for the additional funding proposal you submitted for the summer reading programs." "You came to my apartment to thank me for a budget proposal?" Amara couldn't hide her amusement. David's smile became self-deprecating. "Okay, that's not entirely true. I've been wanting to meet you in person for months, but every time I work up the courage to suggest it, I remember that you're this incredibly powerful, intimidating foundation executive and I'm just a mid-level policy wonk." His honesty was refreshing after years of dealing with people who always had ulterior motives. "Would you like to come in? I was just making some tea." "I'd like that very much." They spent the next 3 hours talking about education policy, about their shared commitment to helping disadvantaged children, about their backgrounds and dreams and the books that had shaped their thinking. David had grown up in San Francisco, the son of immigrants who had sacrificed everything to give him opportunities they had never had. His path to government service had been driven by the same sense of obligation that motivated Amara's foundation work. "I should go," he said finally, glancing at his watch. "It's after midnight, and you probably have early meetings tomorrow." "I do," Amara admitted, but she found herself reluctant to end the conversation. But this was nice. Really nice. "Would you like to have dinner sometime? Somewhere public, completely professional, with extensive documentation that I'm not trying to influence foundation policy through personal relationships." Amara laughed. The first genuine, unguarded laugh she had shared with a man in years. "I'd like that. But you should know I'm not very good at the whole dating thing anymore. I'm suspicious and guarded and I analyze everything to death. I'm patient and straightforward and I hate playing games," David replied. "Maybe we balance each other out." After he left, Amara stood in her living room feeling something she hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. Not the desperate hope of her marriage to Jonathan, built on fantasies and willful blindness, but something steadier and more real. The next morning brought news that Jonathan had been spotted at a charity event in the Hamptons, apparently trying to rehabilitate his image by associating himself with worthy causes. Marcus's report included photos of him looking older and diminished, his famous charm replaced by the desperate energy of a man trying to claw his way back to relevance. Looking at the photos, Amara felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no pain. Jonathan Thornfield was simply a man she used to know, someone from a life she had outgrown completely. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. "Had a great time last night. Any chance you're free for dinner Friday? I know a little Ethiopian place that changes lives." Amara smiled and typed back, "I love having my life changed. It's a date." As she prepared for another day of meetings and decisions and the important work of building something meaningful, Amara caught her reflection in the window. The woman looking back at her was confident, successful, powerful. But more than that, she was genuinely happy. Not the performed happiness of her marriage, but the deep contentment that came from knowing exactly who she was and what she valued. Jonathan Thornfield had tried to diminish her, to make her believe she was worth only what she could provide him. Instead, he had inadvertently given her the greatest gift possible, the knowledge of her own strength. She was Amara Sinclair, daughter of Brooklyn, builder of dreams, champion of the overlooked and underestimated. She was a woman who had been knocked down and had chosen to rise stronger than before. And she was just getting started. The intercom buzzed with Rebecca's voice. "Ma'am?" The mayor's office is on line 1, and the Washington Post wants to schedule an interview about your potential congressional run. Amara straightened her shoulders and walked toward her desk, toward another day of using her power for good, toward a future she was building one decision at a time. Behind her, the Manhattan skyline glittered with possibility, and ahead of her lay a world full of problems she was uniquely positioned to solve. The girl from Brooklyn had become a force of nature, and she was ready to change the world. What does true victory look like to you? Is it defeating your enemies, or building something better than what they tried to destroy? Share your thoughts on what real triumph means. 5 years later. From the New York Times, Sunday edition. Congresswoman Amara Sinclair announces Presidential Exploratory Committee. Former Thornfield Foundation executive continues unlikely political rise. Washington, Representative Amara Sinclair, Democrat, New York, announced yesterday that she will form an exploratory committee for a potential 2028 presidential campaign, capping a remarkable political journey that began with exposing her ex-husband's corruption and continued through 5 years of advocacy for education reform, affordable housing, and criminal justice reform. America needs leaders who understand what it's like to struggle, to fight for every opportunity, to refuse to accept that some people matter more than others, Sinclair said at a packed press conference in her Brooklyn district office, the same neighborhood where she grew up in poverty. The announcement came just days after her marriage to Department of Education official David Chen in a small ceremony attended by family and close friends. Unlike her first wedding, this celebration was notably private, with the couple requesting donations to literacy programs in lieu of gifts. When asked about her ex-husband Jonathan Thornfield, who was recently arrested again for securities fraud related to his latest business ventures, Congresswoman Sinclair simply said, "I wish him well in his personal journey, but my focus is on the future we're building together, not the past we're leaving behind." At 34, Sinclair would be among the youngest candidates ever to seek the presidency, but political analysts note that her combination of business experience, policy expertise, and compelling personal story could make her a formidable candidate in an increasingly populist political landscape. In her congressional office, Amara Sinclair-Chin folded the newspaper and smiled. Outside her window, the Capitol dome caught the morning light, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear the sounds of a city waking up to new possibilities. She had learned long ago that the best revenge wasn't destruction. It was transformation. It was taking everything someone had tried to use against you and turning it into the foundation for something they could never have imagined. The poor girl from Brooklyn was ready to run for President of the United States. And this time she was going to win everything. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.